Alright students, welcome back. Yesterday, you might remember we were talking about long-run adjustments where if you're in an output gap, like here we have a recession, eventually the economy will fix itself. People will be forced, or there'll be a downward pressure on wages. People will begin to accept lower paying jobs the longer they're out of work. Short and aggregate supply shifts back to the right, and we end up back at full employment. All works out great, unless you're one of these people that doesn't have a job and you're just sitting around waiting for the economy to recover. So another thing you might want to try is actually doing something. Fiscal policy involves two tools. Congress can either change taxes or change government spending. Those are their tools. And so that's going to make up fiscal policy. So let's take a look at what fiscal policy would be when we're in a recession. If you start in a recession, we're going to be over here. We're going to be short of long-run equilibrium, so we're not going to be at full employment output. Our problem is we're going to be experiencing high unemployment. We'll be experiencing high levels of unemployment, and so to fix that, the fiscal policy will be pretty simple. You either lower taxes, or government spending, you increase it, or a combination of the two. So if we were to lower taxes, the part of aggregate demand that would be affected, the CIGX, it would be C, consumer spending. If we lower taxes, consumer spending increases, aggregate demand shifts to the right, we get back to full employment output. Or if you increase government spending, the part that's going to be affected of aggregate demand is G, CIGX. G is government spending. So if you do one or the other or both, we'll have a shift to the right in the aggregate demand curve. We'll end up with full employment output, and we'll end up with a higher inflation. So our unemployment rate goes down, which is great. Our inflation does go up, so real wages are going to take a shot. Remember, in the short run, nominal wages are sticky. So as we move from this price level to this price level, we end up with higher prices, same nominal wages, so we end up with a lower real wage. That's the only problem that we really have here for consumers. However, this will put our government budget in a deficit. Government budget is made up of taxing and spending. Taxes is the money that the government brings in. Spending is the money that they spend. Kind of like our own budgets. Like my paycheck would be like the government's taxes. My spending or my checking account would be the government's spending. So we end up in a deficit here. So the only problem here is that you have to the government's going to have to borrow the money in the form of government bonds. We'll get to that later though. Just understand that when we run a expansionary, this would be called, I should actually add that here, this would be called expansionary fiscal policy. When you run expansionary fiscal policy, you end up with a government budget deficit. Okay, and now I will show you contractionary fiscal policy. Alright, on the other end of the business cycle, we're going to have to run what's called a contractionary fiscal policy. So if we're in an inflationary gap, that means that our unemployment rate is really low, below the natural rate of unemployment, because we're beyond full employment output. We're making more than we would be able to make if we were only experiencing the natural rate of unemployment. And so the problem here is high inflation. That low unemployment rate isn't a big deal. That's not going to hurt us, but high inflation is the problem. We don't want prices to get out of control. That's going to hurt lenders like banks. They're not going to have any incentive to lend money. That's going to hurt people on a fixed income like the elderly that get Social Security or retirement benefits, and it's going to hurt people that are low-wage workers, low-wage earners. Okay, so in order to keep inflation from spinning out of control, we will take a fiscal policy that is contractionary. We're going to try to bring aggregate demand back to the left. So we want to decrease aggregate demand, shift it back to the left so that we can get back to full employment output and bring that inflation back down, that price level back down. And so the things you do, the two tools, again, fiscal policy's two tools are taxing and spending. And so for taxes, you're going to want to raise them, increase taxes so consumers don't have money to spend. And then government spending, you want to decrease the government spending because again, you want to decrease aggregate demand and get us back to full employment output and bring that inflation back down. Government budget is going to end up going into a surplus. So if you have high taxes and low spending, you're going to be getting extra money as a government. You'll have to hold on to that. And so we'll be in a government budget surplus rather than a deficit this time. All right. we're going to move on to some practice.